we talked because there was quite a thing on X, and it was about like you discovered our Amico lights, like the small red lights. Did you get them already? Like we sent you?
Not yet, but they're one of the best lights from an aesthetic perspective that I've come across.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because like there's this X post or Twitter post, and it has like nearly 400,000 views and I think 3,500 likes and stuff. And you were like posting that, and then this whole day and the day after, like we got like 100 emails like, oh yeah, do you send to the States, and do you do this? Do you send to Australia? And it was a little bit overwhelming for us because so many requests from other countries. And right now we currently only focus on Europe because it's always a hassle to send things abroad because you get packages back and stuff, and it also costs a lot of money. So we actually made the decision to just stay in Europe. But maybe this year we're gonna change that. But this is how we actually met, and I found your profile quite interesting because I mean you call yourself like heliotherapist, circadian biology educator, like all these things, and that's exactly my message and my mission as well, to share that with people in Germany. And somehow, in some aspects, Germany is always like 4 or 5 years behind what's going on in the States when it comes to biohacking, all this stuff. And maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit for the community and what you're exactly working on, because it's always nice to just get to know really like great people. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And, my story is a relatively simple one, I say, and I think a lot of people resonate with it. I started playing soccer or football for the European audience at the age of 4. I pursued that. I wanted to basically play professionally. I wanted to go pro. And so I pursued that for the next 22 years until I was around like 24, 25. And then the pivotal moment for me was when my father passed of a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. He actually had 2 heart attacks within the span of a year. The second one put him into a coma. And while all that was happening, I was overseas in England trying to get a contract and, get into the game professionally. And so that's what really led me down the path of understanding health from a more comprehensive and holistic perspective. And I didn't stumble upon the circadian stuff until maybe 4 or 5 years after that. It was only a couple of years where I found this subject of circadian biology. And from there, it's taken on a life of its own. Like I truly am obsessed with the field. I think that this is an area of study that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in. And so that's really why I call myself a circadian biology educator, is because I kind of like to break down the larger concepts, the more complex concepts, and then funnel that down into a more simplistic and basic framework for people who don't really want to dive into the science.
Yeah. Now I found this really important as well, and I always because I'm a chiropractor, and it's really one of the main things in my practice was when I just gave people the blue blocking glasses, and suddenly they slept better, their pain also got better, and the whole influence of light on this subject it's insane, and I realized that not many people actually, if you ask me like how many like people talk in Germany really openly about that, I don't know many, like maybe a handful of people like openly discuss circadian biology and the influence of light. And maybe Alexander Wunsch as well.
Incredible work. I always reference his work.
Yeah. So he's a friend of mine, and I get to know him really, really well. And he's kind of one of the only ones, who is really into this stuff. And when you're at his house, he has like all those books from the 1700s, 1800s, one of the first books about light and all that stuff. And I think there's no other person in the world like him when it comes to light, and so credits to him for this work. And of course, Jack Cruz, you get to know him as well, right?
Yeah. You get to know the best parts of him and sometimes the worst parts of him.
Have you been like properly in the whole Cruz community a little bit, or not really? Yeah.
No, I've mainly been watching from the outside in. I mean, he blocked me on Twitter a while back and then unblocked me for some reason. So again, I'm just interested in the work. I think that a lot of his ideas are very interesting, and I do think he's a key character when it comes to popularizing a lot of the subject, or at least like this subject in a more comprehensive manner. And so I give my respect to him for that, for sure.
Yeah. So from your own perspective, like, did it make a difference for your own health as well? Because most of the people when they dive into that thing is because you suffer yourself, and then you try to build a foundation. And I guess from your perspective, like if I would ask you like, what is the number one foundation for our health, you know, and how did you experience it? How would you see it?
It's a good question. For me, I've always been relatively healthy, which is great. I'm very grateful for that. It's more so the preventative strategy around like what I experienced with my father that really shocked me into, taking action on this subject. I think that the way that my father grew up was, I mean, he was an athlete. He played soccer often. Like at the age of 51 he passed when he was 51 years old, and he could outrun me. Like he was a very fit individual outside a lot of the time. And so I take more of that preventative approach just because of what I experienced through his experience. And, for me, I just feel like light and circadian biology is the most underrated and overlooked subject when it comes to holistic health. Because if you take a look at health from a first principles perspective, light and circadian biology is that bedrock. And it really controls everything else from the immune system to brain function to, just your risk of chronic disease in general. And so I always try to stress the point that this is the foundation upon which we build everything else. And we really need to view every aspect of health, whether it's detoxification or training, from a circadian lens. So that's really what I try to get out there in terms of the message.
So I mean, when someone has a health issue, you know, and you Google it, and like, I mean, in the States, you're even more crazy when it comes to supplements and stuff, you know, like that's normally the typical route people, maybe the first route is like, okay, just taking medication and just being in the normal system. And then the second route is like, okay, maybe need to change the diet and maybe take some supplements. So from your perspective, that's not the way to start from your perspective.
No, because it's not root cause thinking. I think that in the United States, there's a huge consumerist play to a lot of this stuff. Like, how much money are you going to make on a certain supplement? How can we? And there's kind of a little bit of a change here because people are moving to more, let's say, bioavailable ingredients, like you think of methylcobalamin or something of that nature. But at the end of the day, this is a consumerist game, and people can get lost in that game. And so, if we can educate people in the first principles understanding of how health works, then I think we can prevent people from spending money unnecessarily while also getting to the real work behind, making improvement from a health standpoint. And so, you take a look at the United States, over 50% of people are either pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. I mean, what is it? Over like 75% of people are either overweight or obese. So it's not working, and we need a different strategy, to say the least.
Yeah. So what would be your way of like maybe explaining it like in a really easy and simple way, also for people here in Germany and just people who listen to it and they've maybe never heard about circadian biology and stuff, and like how would you build it up?
Yeah, it's a good question. The way I frame it is you have to think of the entire body, every aspect of it, as a circadian system. So everything from your brain to, light sensing proteins in your skin to the mitochondria, which are at the heart of overall health. All of these aspects of biology are light sensing in nature. And if we take a look at what the circadian rhythm is, it's just a 24-hour cycle that the body follows in relation to various external circadian cues like light or exercise or temperature. So what we call Zeitgebers. I'm sure people in Germany are familiar with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, every aspect of the body is designed as a circadian mechanism. And so again, the reason why I call it the bedrock of health is because that's where everything starts. Every organ, every cell, every tissue in your body is linked to circadian genes and circadian clocks. And so that is the first domino that we push in order to make sure things function properly. And if we don't have that first domino pushed, if we don't have circadian biology in mind, then we start to experience a lot of these systemic issues, which then over time result in chronic disease. And I think that's really what most people are struggling with, because if you look at, let's say, someone who's a type 2 diabetic or who experiences autoimmunity, these are fundamentally manifestations of circadian disruption on a long enough time scale. And if you look at the modern environment, I mean, it's quite literally designed to create circadian disruption, from the lighting to the late night food, and so on. So it's so fundamental to overall health.
Yeah, no, it's very true. But yeah, I always find it really, really difficult. If like it feels like, especially in Germany, when you say Licht, it's a German word for light. like you straight away go into the spiritual side, and it's like if people like it goes in and out, and people don't listen to it, and it feels so unattractive for people, and maybe it's also unattractive because I mean when you start doing all these things, it's not you have this instant gratification thing that you're like, okay, now it's like I take this pill and I feel a lot better. Or do you have different experience with that? Like when you like, do you work with clients as well? Like, do you do coaching in that way?
Yeah, I work with people in person and then online. I think there's, you bring up a really good point because a lot of this work doesn't provide instant gratification from my standpoint. But then on the other hand, you have certain things like the dark lens blue light blockers or grounding
Yeah,
or, just blocking artificial light after at night. And these things have a very real impact within 5 to 10 minutes. Like you can readily tell the difference between, let's say, a dark room with candlelight versus a room full of conventional LEDs. And so I think there's a little bit of both worlds in that. And I think it's really about getting people to experiment on a few things that really give them that instant return. Because then you have their curiosity and you can get them into the work. Like, don't start them on something that's going to take a really long time to see results in. I think that's an important part of the equation here because a lot of people are not educated about this stuff. And they kind of think it's fringe or maybe pseudoscientific because the education is just so poor around a lot of this stuff. It certainly doesn't offer a comprehensive perspective on it.
so if you work with your clients, like what are the instant things you would implement straight away that people feel like, okay, I'm investing my money in a really good way here that I have a feeling of.
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, watching sunrise is like the first thing. A few other things that come to mind is like putting any blue light blocking filters on all technology. I noticed that has a huge return for people in terms of, avoiding headaches, eye tension, anything of that nature. And then I think the more important one is like, sunbathing, getting more skin in the game, and then making it really dark after sunset and using circadian friendly lighting. I
Yeah.
think that, if you can watch sunrise and then use the circadian friendly lighting at night and make it dark, that really seems to be the duality that causes the most change here. And it makes sense when you study the first principles of this game.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So it's always what I say as well. It's about the polarity, and if you live a life constantly like you have too little light during the day and too much during the night, it's like a flat line kind of, and you don't really have those, big emotions anymore. And like, you see it with people as well, right? Like if people need more stimulation, like more crazy music, more pornography and stuff, just because maybe your dopamine system is completely out of whack, right?
Yeah, it's a huge problem these days.
Yeah, yeah. So what, yeah, like the whole morning perspective, like, I mean, in Lichtblock, like our main perspective is to say like, okay, what you do during the day, we cannot really control it that much because people are in shitty environments like offices and all this stuff. And maybe you can work on it, of course, to get out of that. But I think from my perspective, the most important thing is to have a safe space at home where you say like, okay, maybe when the sun goes down, that your home in the end at night is like a safe space where you say, okay, the lighting is good. And that's already half of the rent, we would say in German. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a place for understanding that if you can make a lot of these changes automatic, then it's just going to help you get better results, and you don't really have to think about it. Which is why I like a lot of the the circadian friendly lighting, and which is why I'm also searching for lighting lighting products or fixtures such as yours that
Yeah.
actually make sense from an aesthetic and circadian perspective. I think that's super important here.
Yeah. No, 100%. Why is it important in the morning to get sunlight in the eyes? And maybe not necessarily just from because people I think understood already it's from that your whole system goes into synchronization, like the circadian biology. But are there other reasons why you should see the sun in the first couple of hours in the morning? Like,
Yeah, for sure. I think that the circadian alignment's a huge reason. But if we take a look at other things, finer things that not many people understand, just the mere exposure of most of your skin to that sunrise, that infrared and red, which we primarily find during that time within the spectrum. I think that the creation of two skin proteins, filigran and uricanic acid, are very important. These skin proteins actually have a protective effect on the skin barrier, and they moisturize the skin barrier. So this gets into the idea of tanning and midday UV exposure. The first step that anyone should take is to really expose most of their skin during the morning time if they can, because that's going to allow the production of those two skin proteins, which then has a very powerful effect for building up what we call the solar callus, but also just preventing burns. I think that's a big problem with most people when they get into this work, is that they don't think about the morning time sunbathing, and they only go into the high UV index times, which can then leave them open to burning. So that's one thing. If we think about, just the power of red and infrared light and all of the wavelengths associated within those two spectrums, I mean, it's incredible. Like everything from propelling blood flow to near infrared light stimulating subcellular melatonin from the mitochondria. Again, there's just so much research on it, which is just awesome to know. But again, you have to compile that research, which is why I've done a lot of that work to basically provide people with at least some sort of framework to understand these things.
I mean, I really love you. Like, I only discovered you now, and I'm following you on X as well, and you're posting quite a lot of stuff and really interesting stuff. And I think also your Instagram, it has some aesthetic view. It's like this darkish red, and there was also one post where you're like, okay, you have to suck it up, you just wear those really dark blue blocking glasses at night, and that's how life should be actually, and because people we have two different options for the blue blocking glasses. One which goes to 500, and then it goes up. You still have the green, and then one with the darker versions. And we literally have 95% of people buy the other ones because they feel like they can be part of the life still at night. But then again, from the circadian biology perspective, it's actually nature. It's better than nothing. But in the end, which light is normal during the night? No light, right?
We're always trying to get back to how nature, allowed us to co-evolve with how our biology is. So, light and dark cycle, you really need to be aligned with that. And you can't, you have some leeway if you're pretty healthy, but over time that stuff really matters and it adds up.
Yeah. And it was also I'm doing some keynotes as well on some events, and I always ask the people, it's okay, when you think about light, what first comes to your mind? And it's mostly vitamin D, UV light, things like that, or blue light maybe as well. But no one is talking about red light, infrared light, and it's I think it's also in the bubble where we are, people maybe they know the red light panels and stuff, but they don't actually know that's 50% of the whole solar spectrum, and what, my perspective is actually we have to bathe our body in near infrared light because it, and this gives our body structure, right?
Infrared's incredible. I mean, people don't know of the fact that it penetrates the deepest, I believe, out of all the light wavelengths. So it gets pretty deep into the body from a relative standpoint. And then, of course, you have the blood vessels, you have the water content within blood and all these other light sensing mechanisms which allow that light to penetrate into the body at an even deeper level. And I always love to break down the spectrum to people. If you take a look at, let's say you're at the equator, it's a 13 UV index, and you want to understand how the full spectrum of the sun is broken down. Only 3 to 5% of the full spectrum is UV light. Yeah. Which just off the bat is just very interesting because most people would think that it's a higher number, right? And then when you take a look at, let's say, visible light, that makes up about 40 to 43, maybe 42 to 45% of the sun's full spectrum. Red's included in that, violet, all the colors of the rainbow, let's say. And then, like you mentioned, infrared is the biggest portion of that, around 50 to 55%. And so you have to ask yourself, why has nature created such a specific wavelength distribution to the spectrum? And I think that's because biology co-evolved with the sun's full spectrum, and we need it in accordance to how nature created it, right? So, it's really important to understand it from that standpoint because people just don't think about it from that perspective.
Yeah. Because do you know Scott Zimmerman? Have you heard about him? He's like this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Scott, the Fosbury and all these guys, and I really like their work because they publish some stuff as well where they have this infrared camera. I think it takes up 850 nanometers. And the funny thing is, like, I also have like here I have an infrared spectrometer. So when you use a really big red light panel, and I could stand in front of it, and I would use this thing and put it onto my back, literally on my back, and I would shine in front of me, like with a red light panel, I would pick up infrared on the spectrometer. And this is insane, because literature only says like, oh, it's up to only 5 millimeters or whatever. And it's like, even from my perspective, I'm like, okay, what the fuck? What is going on here? You know? And
And it's the reason why I have so much reservation about centralized medicine, because how much of the stuff that we actually search through within the literature is wrong or just not updated.
Yeah. Yeah. If just a normal everyday guy like me can prove it that it's wrong, you know, then it's okay.
True.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I asked you like, what are some topics you like to talk about, or what really fascinates you? And you said one of the big things is the whole misunderstanding about skin cancer and stuff. Is it a really big topic in America that a lot of people talk about? Because in Germany, it's not that big. I mean, I guess in Australia it's really big, you know, because of all the UV. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge misunderstood subject in the States. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know which is worse, Australia or the States, in terms of the societal messaging around UV light. I might side with Australia, because I think that their campaigns have been just a little bit more comprehensive and effective. And it seems like people are less likely to question the narrative around over there instead of here. But yeah, the subject of like UV light and its relationship to skin cancer, I think, is grossly misunderstood. Arguably one of the most misunderstood subjects in the area of circadian biology and overall health. Like, one thing that I learned recently is that two companies, specifically L'Oreal and Nestle, actually created these PR campaigns back in the late 1970s in order to get people to fear the sun so that they could sell more of their products, especially sunscreens. And so that's just one piece of the historical context involved here. But I think the more fundamental thing to understand is just how centralized medicine approaches UV light research. Like, you're talking about using isolated UV, which is completely alien and foreign to how nature uses the full spectrum, because obviously you have other light wavelengths packaged with UV light. And then centralized medicine studies nocturnal animals, often albino nocturnal animals, who are most susceptible to isolated UV, under artificially blue lit conditions, which is inherently toxic to all biological systems, and then often within an environment that's high non-native EMF pollution. So like, this does not extend itself to how nature works. We can't go off of those results. And it's funny, because I came across a specific study, I think done in 1997 or 99, where they talked about how non-coherent near-infrared light actually prevents cytotoxicity from UV light. And so we quite literally have centralized dermatology telling us that they have never studied full spectrum light, aka polychromatic light, in a controlled setting that replicates nature. And so I think there's a lot of holes in that understanding, in that framework, which then creates false assumptions such as, okay, we need to protect ourselves from UV light. We need to avoid the sun. We need to avoid high UV light times. I think it's just, from every angle, it's just terrible, like the gross misunderstanding involved.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, there are those studies, you know, people like being most in the sun, like dying, like, no, less young, or like having an older age, you know. And I think from Sweden, right, those big ones, and relationship to vitamin D and stuff. Yeah, it's yeah. I could go so deep into that topic.
Even centralized dermatology, for example, like the way that modern dermatologists got their, let's say, mission is they quite literally hired a PR campaign, I think in the early 1900s, in order to label them as skin cancer fighters and to put a whole new spin on what they actually do. Yeah. And so I think there's some also nefarious intention involved, which has then led to certain problems like melanoma overdiagnosis in society. I mean, specifically in the United States, it's insane how much overdiagnosis of melanoma there is, which then creates this sort of iatrogenic harm that people experience. And it's truly sad. So even the literature on melanoma, squamous and basal cell carcinoma, there's a lot of holes involved with the centralized narrative there.
Yeah. Do you know that I think there's a study from 2023 which links blue light to skin cancer, and I found it really interesting. I mean, it was just an experiment with rats they did.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, I saw it and I was like, okay, crazy daisy. Yeah, because, I mean, you see, like, it's like we live in such a crazy artificial alienated world. You know, some people literally never see the normal sun or literally infrared, you know, and the times when we had this old school light bulb and stuff. I think maybe that was one reason why we still were a little bit more healthy, like maybe 5 to 10 years ago than right now. Like, did you go into that topic as well a little bit?
I still need to, I do agree with you fundamentally. I still need to learn about certain aspects like low emission glass. I know that, I've studied how that type of glass influences the full light spectrum.
Yeah.
It just creates a combination of UVA and blue light in isolation, essentially. And so that's very problematic. But yeah, just the lack of infrared within the indoor environment is a huge problem that not many are focused on. Outside of that, I would say here's one question. Take a look at what people are doing throughout most of their day. I mean, in the United States, we quite literally spend more than 90% of our time indoors. And so when you look at what type of light we have indoors, that's something to be questioned seriously.
100%. Yeah. Do you think it makes sense? I mean, from the American perspective, like the mission Elon Musk has, like to build a new civilization on Mars, does it make sense for you, or is every cell in your body telling like, oh, that's completely bullshit?
It's a good question. I do think it's foolish. Now, will we be able to survive for some period of time if we do accomplish that objective? Sure. But are we going to thrive? I think
Yeah.
that's the real question. And I don't think we are, because if you look at like the impact that space travel has on human beings, it's just terrible from every angle. And so, yeah, so, cellular biology and overall human biology evolved to be on this planet. We have a very specific set of conditions on the Earth. And the more we move away from those conditions, I think the more damage and mortality we will experience. And I don't think you can solve this issue with technology. You might be able to get 5, 10, 15% of the way there, but I don't think people will achieve immortality. I don't believe in the Brian Johnson framework for overall health. It can only take us so far. We really need to be aligned with nature.
Is Brian Johnson for you a healthy person?
Mentally, it seems like he is. I think he's got a lot of ducks in a row on that end. Physically, I do think he is pretty healthy right now. And I don't really, I think it's because he does a lot of other things that puts him in a good category of health. His perspective on sunlight and UV light is completely wrong, in my opinion. And I think that might actually be antithetical to his goal of obviously not dying.
Did he
Especially
just publish something about red meat as well? That it's super bad. I think it was something. So,
Yeah, I mean, he's giving into terrible observational data on nocturnal animals, and it's just the typical false paradigm that people fall into when it comes to red meat. And so, I think he's got some things in check, like most people, but other things he's just has it's grossly misunderstood and misunderrated.
yeah. But I mean, like, I think he's using red light as well, right? Red light panel. Do you
Yeah,
know?
which is the irony of the whole subject.
Yeah.
I mean, you're literally taking the sun's light wavelengths and using them in an artificial setting. Like, this is what I often say when it comes to dermatologists. They quite literally demonize UV light and blue light and maybe some other light wavelengths. But when you go into their clinics, they will be using isolated UV and blue light in order to heal certain conditions like
It's
chronic
true.
skin inflammatory issues.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's also the whole thing about like when you talk about red light therapy and the whole thing is laser better or not, you know? And of course, like at least in Germany, like people pay a lot of money for laser red light treatment and dermatologist practices. And I think you could have it a lot more easy, like by either just go to the sun or just get yourself a cheap red light panel and that's it, you know? And maybe have a good diet as well. So what is your perspective on like, have you ever tried to be vegan or something, or like which nutritional perspective makes sense for you to follow as a human being?
For me, I really like right now. I really like the animal based type of lifestyle. I think that there are some holes in it potentially. I really do ascribe to a lot of Paul Chek's philosophy when it comes to nutrition. his study of metabolic typing, biochemical individuality, that stuff really seems to resonate with me because there's massive variation and difference with how nutrition relates to human beings. And there's also, there's the discussion of where did your ancestors evolve from a geographical standpoint? What type of latitude are you at? There are many factors when it comes to nutrition. And I do like to apply the circadian lens to it because I think it's an important one that not many people are covering, from the angle of, let's say, how many biophotons is your food, giving out? Where is the food grown in relation to where your ancestors were latitude-wise? So there's a lot of factors involved. But generally, if we just stick with whole foods and nutrient-dense foods, then I think we'll be all right. I think arguably most of the problem comes when you start consuming processed and packaged junk, the processed white flours, the grains, all that stuff. That's really where most of the issue is, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, true. Same for me. Did you ever dive into the whole deuterium story as well, or?
Yeah, deuterium is a fascinating, especially as it relates to the electron transport chain. I'm incredibly fascinated by that.
Can you maybe because I have a hard time to maybe explain it, why is it suddenly an important thing and some people talk about it?
So for me, if we take a look at mitochondrial health, which is fundamental to overall systemic health, we have to look at the electron transport chain within the inner mitochondrial membrane. So within each mitochondrion, you have this electron transport chain, which is made of 5 complexes. And if you take a look at what let's say the energy source is for the electron transport chain and these complexes, biology really loves light hydrogen. I think it's called protium. And so throughout these complexes, protium is used extensively throughout the process. When we get into deuterium, which is essentially heavy hydrogen, that becomes problematic because from what I've seen, it is actually double in terms of atomic weight. And so that that change might sound small and insignificant, but it's actually a large enough change to when deuterium comes into the electron transport chain, which is where it's not supposed to be, it actually breaks that entire system. And so over time, that creates dysfunction in each mitochondrion, which then over time creates this basically destruction of the mitochondrial colony. So does that kind of make sense how I broke it down?
Yeah, but where does the deuterium come from? Does it come from the food or the water we drink, or what is the main source of it?
So I think mainly nutrition. If you take a look at most people's diets, they have a heavy carbohydrate diet. So carbs seem to have the most deuterium load when we compare all 3 macronutrients compared to fat and protein. Outside of that, I would say supplements is a really nasty offender of deuterium levels. Even things like a collagen supplement could have like 300 parts per million deuterium content. So
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the supplement manufacturer, but that's something to look out for. But I think nutrition really takes the bigger part of the role here.
Okay. Because I think a couple of years ago, I tried the whole deuterium depleted water, and it was just freaking expensive, and I wasn't really sure if it made sense or not. I don't even know if it's the trend is kind of gone right now or if it's still existing.
Yeah, I'm actually in talks with one company that's about to roll out some deuterium depleted water here in the States. Nice. But I think it's still people just don't know what it is. It's so so niche to people.
It's true, yeah. Because I listened to some podcasts with here, Last of Burrows, and I think Luke, what was his name? The guy who, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name. Well.
Yeah, but he has this really big podcast, and I think it felt like it was quite a hype for a couple of months, and then suddenly it was gone again. That's just my perspective, and yeah, interesting.
Well, here's the interesting thing. It's okay, full spectrum sunlight depletes deuterium. We know that. Right. Yeah. So, why don't we just get outside and start sunbathing instead?
But are you that strict also? No, you live, where are you right now? In California or where?
Southern California, yeah.
Southern California, okay. How is the weather right now in California?
Right now, I mean, we're going through our winter. So the UV index maybe hits a 3-4 max, but okay. I still think it's a decent enough change to actually go through, some sort of seasonal variation.
Yeah. because I like the whole real big thing started for me personally when I was in Mexico. So I met some of the cruise guys, and I've been there for 5 weeks, and I met some people who lived there for even a few years already. And that was a really fascinating thing. Yeah, like in the near Playa del Carmen, like the whole area, where they say, "Oh, it's perfectly grounded there" and stuff. And like if someone, let's say, has some really crazy chronic condition right now, like and you live in a city, like is that like as from a coaching perspective, like would you say, okay, change the environment like 1%, or like, okay, use those tools, do this kind of stuff? Like how strict are you with your rules when it comes to coaching?
I'm not that strict compared to other people like Dr. Jack Cruz
Yeah,
or whoever is out there. I think that in a certain narrow context, you need to really try to make the argument for somebody to move to closer to the equator, more natural environment. Like let's say they live in downtown New York City. I mean, it's just not going to work from my perspective in order to get back your health if you have a serious mitochondrial disease. You can do some things and improve it to some extent, but I do think ultimately that if you have a serious mitochondrial disease, then you're better off moving just for the sake of your own mental health and for the sake of getting results quickly.
yeah,
But outside of that, I'm very flexible with my recommendations to people, especially coaching clients. It just depends on where they live. It depends on, adapting themselves to, or adapting their lifestyle to where they actually live from a latitude perspective. And it's ultimately about getting the key pillars down, like, watching sunrise, spending more time outside, blocking artificial light after sunset. Those are all things you can do regardless of where you are from a latitude standpoint. So I'm
yeah.
not, I'm not rigid. I try to emphasize the importance of certain practices because people need to understand that, you do have to follow the set of guidelines, but ultimately we can adapt ourselves around those guidelines to some degree.
Yeah, nice. Did you ever get big into the topic of melanin, like also in the brain and the skin and fat? Like, because I think it's the one topic where not many people are really like big into, because melanopsin like in the retina in the eyes, but otherwise people are like, okay, why is there this pigment somewhere else in the body, right?
Melanin is one of the more passionate subjects I have. I think that there's a
Okay.
huge misunderstanding of that in the United States. So I still have a little bit more deeper to go in terms of like the intricacies from a biological standpoint of its relationship with the rest of the body. But I mean, fundamentally, melanin is just such an incredible polymer.
Is it like like what is the main like, I mean, we know melanin in the skin, like if you tan, of course, but there are some people say that melanin actually like does it also create something, or like is it like a storage, like a battery, or how would you see it?
I say that melanin has, so let's start from the basics. You have three different types of melanin. You have neuromelanin in the brain. All human beings have that. And then when it comes to, then you have two other ones, which are eumelanin, which is responsible for the blacks and browns in nature. So think of like a darker skinned person closer to the equator. He has more eumelanin. And then you have pheomelanin, which is where the lighter skinned people come in. So pheomelanin is responsible for the reds, the oranges, yellows, pinks in nature. And this is kind of where, people from, let's say, a Nordic country come in because they actually tan in more of a reddish, pinkish hue. But those are the three different forms of melanin. The you know the benefits of melanin are just so extensive when you study the literature. So, it's radioprotective. Eumelanin blocks 99% of all UV. Pheomelanin seems to only block about 20 to 30%. But either way, it does block UV light. And then when you get into the finer benefits, I mean, radioprotective, antioxidant, anti-cancer, even shows antiviral properties. Like I think I saw a study that it was able to stop HIV, in vitro, granted, but it just has so many benefits that it's incredible, and it's found all throughout nature. But ultimately, like this is not just a matter of skin damage, as centralized dermatology wants you to believe. It's way deeper than that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, call it quantum. Everything is quantum. Yeah.
And then,
So
there's also the perspective of melanin from photoconductive, piezoelectric standpoint. Like if you take a look at how photons interact with melanin, they are able to create free electrons out of that interaction. So, there's also the argument of human photometabolism and the question of whether we can actually live off of and create energy off of this relationship. And I think we can to a degree, but again, it goes levels deeper, and it's so incredible from a nature perspective.
Yeah. Awesome. So what do you think is like, how can we, I mean, you do already, like, how many followers do you have on X? Quite a few, right? Like,
I think I'm approaching almost 50,000 now.
Awesome. Yeah. So you see, there's a lot of people like are really interested in that topic. And I think it's really good to, that there are accounts like yours, 100%. And like, what are there some other topics you like to emphasize, maybe also for the German people or people from Europe who listen?
For me, I think that, understanding first principles of all this stuff is super, super important.
Yeah.
But I think that where I come in is I do actually like to battle it out with centralized dermatologists and ophthalmologists and all of these, just stereotypical physicians. I see a huge, there is value to what they do, but ultimately they are guided by this false narrative. And so I would urge anybody who is interested in getting into this work to study it at a deep enough level, and then don't be afraid of having interactions with people who are more centralized in their thinking.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we need people to stand up for the message, and we need people to share it far and wide.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, nice. Like maybe let's don't do it too long, So I think it's always nice on our podcast to maybe make it a little bit shorter, because I had some podcasts with like 1, 2, or 3 hours even, and I think it's just really great for people to maybe get to know your face and to see like, hey, like we link all your, maybe you can send it to me as well, like all your information and all your notes, Maybe you even want to share some documents or something. If you have something, just send it to me. And
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add in the end?
I would say it's been a fun conversation. Definitely, hopefully we can do this again. And from there, you can find all my socials. I'm sure you'll link them down below. But also follow the 2 a.m. podcast. Might seem like a contradictory name for a guy who loves sleep, but we have some great conversations there that are even outside of the circadian realm.
Yeah, this is what I didn't really get. Maybe you can summarize a little bit what you do. Like, is it just random conversations about life?
I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. I have one co-host. He's my editor and all that stuff. He does a really great job. But try to think about those late night conversations you have around a fireplace, or maybe you're camping with your friends. That's kind of the vibe that we're trying to replicate.
Nice. Do you also have a fireplace?
I do, thankfully. I use it often.
Nice. Great. Yeah. So it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you get those lights soon, and maybe you can keep me posted about it. Yeah, it would be awesome.
I'll be sharing a lot of content on them. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a beautiful day, and